Welcome to r/Prorevenge, where a scummy professor gets what's coming to him. Our next Reddit post is from Deleted. I'm an early career academic in a small niche field. Right out of grad school, I was able to get a very prestigious fellowship at a very prestigious institution. I was thrilled and went into my first day ready to work my butt off for the 2 terms. The head of the department, John, seemed nice enough on the first day, but it quickly became clear that he was incompetent and a sexist bully. He called any woman who worked with him sweetheart when he was in a good mood and girly when he was in a bad mood. He refused to give me 2 days off to attend my uncle's funeral. The 2 men who worked under him were both allowed 2-week vacations over the year because they were working hard. None of the women were allowed vacations or time off for any reason. If he didn't like you, he would change the requirements of a task at the last minute. I work in a field that sometimes requires pretty high security clearance. With just 2 days' notice, he demanded that one of his friends be able to come to an event that I'd organized that required security clearance to get into the building. His friend was not an American citizen, making security nearly impossible, particularly with that timeline. Instead of listening to reason, he tried to dock my pay in retaliation. I was able to get that denied through HR. Speaking of pay, he frequently forgot to pay all of us and tried to force one of the other female fellows to handle all of his HR issues. Since it wasn't part of the fellowship to handle admin issues, that woman refused, which led to some serious temper tantrums on his part. So I think you get the picture. It was bad. Bad enough, in fact, that the institution hired an outside consulting company to investigate what was happening in the department. At first, I was very hopeful and thought that maybe the situation would get fixed. However, the consulting company also had expertise in this small academic field, and it turns out that the CEO of that consulting company was an old friend of John. I quickly realized that the investigation would go nowhere. Also, at the same time, John was applying for a $1 million grant. This grant is a bit different than most others because it's a community-chosen awardee. There's a grant committee and all members of the committee are nominated by people in the field. The committee then chooses who deserves this grant. Although the grant is considered medium-sized for the field, it's very prestigious. Importantly, the members of the committee are public. Knowing that the investigation was going to go nowhere and knowing the names of all members of the committee, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I had a decent travel stipend as part of the fellowship, so I planned from then on to only attend conferences where a committee member lived. This way, John had to pay for me to go. I then would go to these cities and get in touch with committee members. Because it's a small field, it's not uncommon to schedule informal get-togethers with people in the field, even if you don't know them personally. So I spent a lot of time traveling, which ended up being great for my career anyway, and talking to all sorts of people in the field. I'd offer to buy them a beer in exchange for asking them questions about their career. Through these casual conversations, I'd ask them about personality conflicts in the lab and how they handled them. I never mentioned John by name, but by the end of the chat, it would be obvious who I was talking about and that the issues were serious. I also made sure to talk about Jane, a woman in the field, and how amazing it's been to watch her short but fast-moving career. I realized that all this was pretty subtle, but I hoped that these little seeds would impact the committee's decision. The grant decision was announced 2 weeks after I'd finished my fellowship. At this point, I assumed that John was still going to win it because that's what the grapevine was saying. Academics are so gossipy. But I got a call from another former fellow. The grant went to Jane. The committee cited her short but impactful career. Apparently, John was so upset that he broke his own laptop by throwing it across the room. 3 years later, he still mentions at conferences how Jane never deserved the grant and how he doesn't understand how he lost it. Too bad he broke his laptop. That grant money would have been a great way to buy a new one. Our next Reddit post is from My Little Throwaway Pony. About 10 years ago, I was with my ex-partner who worked at a petrol station chain in Australia. He came down sick with gastro, which is a highly infectious illness resulting in vomiting, diarrhea, fatigue, etc. My ex notified his manager on Tuesday night that he wouldn't be able to make his shift the following morning, as he was vomiting copiously still, and he assumed that he still would be at the time of his shift. His manager replied that my ex had to contact the other workers to get his shift covered. A dick move, but not illegal. My ex spends about an hour trying to get someone to cover for him, with no success. He lets his manager know this, who responds with, "You had better show up for your shift, or you're fired. Doesn't matter if you're sick." His manager had a habit of doing this. He recently made someone work while they had conjunctivitis, which is extremely contagious. And someone came in for their shift after they had been in the hospital that day after having an asthma attack. Well, the following day, my ex went to work. Note that his job also involved food handling, as they had a bread store in the petrol station. So people would come in to pay for their petrol and get a coffee and a donut or pie or cake. While handing one customer their cake, my ex pauses and vomits into a nearby hand-washing sink. During this shift, he continues to handle food and go to the toilet regularly because of the diarrhea. When my ex got home, I asked him if he had been unwell, and he confirmed that he continued to be sick while he was at work. I was absolutely furious that he was threatened with being fired and most likely spread his illness to a bunch of other people. So, I called the health board of my state and reported it. The board sent out someone on a surprise visit to the site, and turns out there are lots of bad food handling and hygiene practices going on, not just the worker illness issues. The company ends up being fined $150,000 and had to make significant changes on how some things were run. As for the manager, turns out the whole show up even if you're sick or you're fired policy wasn't exactly the company policy, and he got his butt handed to him over it. Down in the comments, we have a similar story from Danny Girl. I had a manager pull this on me. I called out sick at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning for a waitressing shift. I was supposed to be there at 2. It was a 24/7 restaurant, and I was working under a new manager. I had worked there for over a year and had a perfect record. My general manager loved me. I ran my shift like clockwork. My idiot new manager says that I'm not calling out because I'm sick, that I'm just calling out so I can go drinking, and I had better come to work or I'm fired. I know full well that I can't get fired for calling out of work, but I'm super pissed at this guy. So I drag myself to work, despite all my vomiting and diarrhea. My GM sees me walk in the door and doesn't even let me get to the staff room, just right to his office. And he demands to know why I didn't call out. I'm clearly sick. We work with food, and I can wipe out his entire staff bringing the flu in. I show him my phone and tell him that I called out this morning at 7 a.m., which is plenty of time for them to cover my shift because I was sick. However, this stupid new manager told me to come in for work or I'm fired. Well, the GM is pissed, so he goes and grabs this moron who was just about to finish his shift. He brings the moron to my office, and the first thing out of the moron's mouth when he sees me is, "Well, you can't be that sick since you're here." My GM is now screaming at him at full volume, reminds him that he doesn't control firing people, that we don't live someplace where you can just screw with people's jobs like that, and that if someone calls out, no matter the reason, it's the manager's job to find someone to cover that shift. We work with food and people, and sick people can't work. This ass chewing went on for about 15 minutes at full volume. It was epic, and I love my GM. My GM then tells me that he needs to send me home, that I can't work, and he'll pay me my 3 hours for my call-in. Now, here's the fun part. The GM made the moron manager work my entire shift. This moron only lasted about 2 more weeks before he pissed off enough staff that we went to my general manager en masse and told him that we were not working for him anymore. The general manager knew that we were pissed, and he'd already hired a replacement. He then told the moron manager that he was moving him to the graveyard shift. The moron rage quit and then tried to apply for unemployment, which, where I live, you can't get if you quit. Our next Reddit post is from ZZZ Top. I had a fun morning last week starting up my truck and waking everyone up at 2:45 a.m. to learn that someone swiped my catalytic converters. The idiot thieves missed the neighbor's cameras that basically gave away who they were. It's 2 kids from the area who drive around a pretty busted up police Crown Vic. I chose not to call the cops. Instead, I called one of my friends who's code enforcement, and I let him know what my plan was, and he relayed the info to the police that I was finally going to do a nuisance tow on that same Crown Victoria. The car they drive isn't street legal because it has no license plates or insurance or working taillights, and it rattles like crazy due to the trash sound system that they also spend their whole day at a chicken shack smoking. I'm not sure who they're getting the money from, but I'm guessing stealing catalytic converters was part of the equation. When I spotted the car sitting on a quiet street, I called it in and got the go-ahead to tow. I took it straight to the police station, and they tried to run an owner check with the VIN number, only to find out that it hadn't been registered since 2011, and the owner was someone other than the two kids. The cops said that we can go ahead and take it to the junkyard until they can get a black title. That is, a certificate of destruction. By then, the two idiots were running around all over town looking for their car, thinking it got stolen by one of their friends as a prank. The kids found their car at the junkyard and tried to steal it by one of them distracting the owner and the other stealing their car. But the junkyard was aware of who they were, so they cut the drive shaft off beforehand. I missed out on this part, but they got arrested for trying to steal their car back. And they had to watch as the junkyard used a crane to rip the car to shreds. They've been out of jail since, but they haven't left their trailer. I did a drive-by earlier and noticed a beater Jeep Liberty in their driveway, also with no plates. And I'm already working with the cops, so as soon as I see that Jeep in public, I'm towing that car too. Our next Reddit post is from Airworry. One of the big bosses, Billy Bob, around the mine site that I work at, decided to be a smartass one day and instructed someone a level below him, Aaron, to save the mine $34 million a year. Here's what's important. Billy Bob didn't care how Aaron did it. He just told Aaron to get it done, or else he'd make sure they'd lose their job. Now, Aaron had been putting up with this garbage from Billy Bob for the past few months. There's a code of conduct and responsibility that needs to be followed. And Billy Bob worked very hard to find his way through every loophole possible that stopped him from slacking off. This includes dumping a fair amount of extra work onto his employees, but the one in this tale of Prorevenge had it the worst. Billy Bob would constantly belittle Aaron on the mine radios, dump extra paperwork on him, including Billy Bob's own paperwork. Make Aaron drive other employees around the mine site when Aaron was already swamped with the extra paperwork, causing him to lag behind in his other duties that he was supposed to be doing. Aaron was no assistant. It wasn't his job to do Billy Bob's work. And if he refused, Billy Bob technically could start the process of firing AA through some BS loophole. So here's where it gets interesting. After Billy Bob instructed Aaron to save the mine $34 million a year, Aaron figured out damn well that Billy Bob was trying to kiss the butts of the higher-ups and make himself look good. However, instead of doing the work himself, Billy Bob once again dumped it onto Aaron, and Aaron had had enough. Billy Bob has his designated time off and comes back to find a massive, and I mean massive, this thing is one of the biggest production movers on the site, conveyor line parked up miles away from where it's supposed to be, operating and in the equipment yard. If you haven't seen a conveyor line, think if a crane and a conveyor belt had an enormous love child. It had been disassembled and it was sitting in 3 enormous pieces. Billy Bob flies off the handle. He explodes and goes onto the mine radios and screams for Aaron to get down there. Aaron rocks up, and when Billy Bob asked what the hell he had done, Aaron simply shrugged and said, "I pulled the conveyor out of production. It saves you $34 million a year." No matter what Billy Bob argued or how much he threatened, Aaron simply said, "You told me to save $34 million a year. I did just that." No matter how much money the mine would actually lose with this massive machine out of construction, Aaron did as he was told. Of course, the big bosses found out, and when they questioned Billy Bob about it, he pointed the blame to Aaron. Once again, Aaron stood his ground and said that he just did as he was told. Once Billy Bob confirmed what he had instructed Aaron to do, it wasn't long before Billy Bob was sacked. He packed his stuff and walked out the gate the same day. Aaron still happily remains, stress-free, and not to be screwed with. Ooh, I really like this top post from Boonapi. Wow, give half-assed instructions, get half-assed results. That was rSlash_Prorevenge, and if you like this content, check out my podcast where I publish the exact same episodes. Also, hit that subscribe button because I put out new Reddit videos every single day.